Yeah, I was wondering about this actually, because you might know better than me, Joe. From my perspective, battle reports came about because Robin made them happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He came to me and said, I want you to do battle report. It's a bit like this. And he pointed to the one that had been done before in White Dwarf.
Yeah. No. So So I think there'd been a couple of battle reports in White Dwarf before we started doing battle reports. There'd been
at least one,
and then there was one before that as well. I think
that was
really
one with the
early
hand-drawn
on.
artwork for it all.
Yeah, that's right. But they were a rarity, and they were a bit ad hoc. I think they weren't particularly well thought through. I can't remember whether Robin came to me and said, I want you to do battle reports, or whether it was just a conversation, basically, because I know that for me, bringing these books along, I'd grown up reading battle reports. So there was a magazine called Military Modelling, which was a great magazine, so historical wargaming magazine.
Yeah, I used to get it when I was getting my dad got it for me when I was young. Yeah. And you're right, very, very occasionally there'd be a battle report in there.
There would be. Now, this book has some of those battle reports reprinted in it,
really?
by a chap called Charles Grant, who's one of my favourite historical war games rules writers. He's just absolutely brilliant. I can remember reading these battle reports about the battles of Alexander the Great and stuff like that. And in particular, there was one where they were refighting this enormous battle with Alexander the Great. And he said, well, we'd had to kind of like rope in all the miniatures we could find for this thing, and that he was saying there were some that weren't historically accurate for the period, but they fought nonetheless bravely for all that, it just got So I love those battle reports. So I know that the idea of battle reports was something that I was kind of like comfortable with, and I'd seen them, and that kind of like the little maps that came with them and the way they were written were in my mind, basically as a good battle report.
Despite getting military, it was kind of a bit of an alien concept to me, because they've been so rare in that. I only remember one military modelling, which was one about Viking raiders coming ashore, and like the local Saxons trying to gather and fight them off, and the raiders were there trying to like steal pigs and barrels of beer and grain and anything else they could drag off to their ships before the response. But that's the one I can remember out of like years worth of military modelling. So it kind of faded, I think. For me.
Yeah, I think that they didn't have terribly many, but I'd got the books because I was Charles Grant was one of my favourite writers, so I've collected various books of his, and it was the first set of war games rules I ever played games with were written by Charles Grant. So so it kind of stuck with me, and I think that I'd got an idea of the maps, and I think that. So for those very early battle reports, we discussed how they were going to be formatted, and I can remember coming up with the idea that each turn would be a double-page spread, and it would say there'd be a map, and it would say what happened, and then there'd be a sort of like a box out with like tactical lessons that you could learn or things that so we could pick bits of pieces out and kind of address them. Yeah, photographs
on each spread. The idea you get a map and a photo. Bit of blurb, maybe a box out as well, and do it turn by turn.
Yeah, that's right. And do it intros and outros.
That was another big thing about what army you picked and why.
Yeah.
And then an outro, which I always hated that word. I didn't even think it was a real word for ages. But nonetheless, a conclusion, which sort of said, this is what went right, this is what went wrong, and because you're right, because one of the things I did was go back and look at those previous ones that have been in White Dwarf, and they were kind of a bit all over the place. Really, they didn't, and we felt that nice strong format, and that would make it reproducible as well. We realised that if you had a strong format, you could reproduce things much more easily than if you tried to make it from whole cloth every time.
That's right.
So it was key, but those early ones where we literally had to fuzzy felt pieces onto the map and stick it on to send off to the printer. They were a bit fraught. Well, life became a lot easier when it went digital.
Well, the very first ones. Basically, I think we were pretty much writing them ourselves, weren't we? And we were, taking notes as we went along.
Oh, so I was taking the photos.
No.
That was my job at the time. I was a photographer.
So I think we were doing. We had hand-drawn maps as we were going along.
Yes,
writing notes
sketch
down.
Maps, and then we hit on the idea of using Polaroids to take photos of the game, because it was easier and quicker, and it was helpful for setting them back up again. Because what we'd been doing previously when I took photos for White Dwarf, and these were just like the glamour shot type things, but Rick had got me in to do that because I played games and I knew what games actually looked like, whereas the people who'd been doing photography, they tend to make the miniatures, just stand around and look nice, but it didn't look like a game being played.
Yeah.
And I'd already hit on that thing of taking a Polaroid of it and going and showing it to people, saying like, is this the kind of thing you want? And so when we started doing battle reports, it was just a natural extension of that. I was like, well, we should take a Polaroid of what we're doing.
Yeah, and then we learned to stick a little piece of paper down which said the turn number, because otherwise we had loads of Polaroids.
We're like, what is
that
this?
happen? I can't remember.
Or we were
all.
writing on them, as well, trying to write short. Tried that for a while as well, writing a little short description of what was going on.
So we'd fight the battle out effectively in the playtest room. And write notes, and then convert that into an article. You'd take pictures. I can remember Robin struggling manfully coming up with map template things and he resources that he could use to kind of like make nice maps to go in White Dwarf magazine.
Yes.
Or what we considered to be nice maps back then. I mean, when you see them compared to what it's like.
Oh, dude, did I send you a link to that guy who did like basically he built a program to recreate the maps?
Yeah, there's
in second edition style maps.
There's Battle Chronicler.
Is it? That's the guy.
That might be the one.
Because it's brilliant, because it does look exactly like them.
It does, yeah.
You know, full cheese, bright colours, sort of thing. The man's relentless. There's no pretension. It's marvellous. But I will say they were nice and clear, which is the primary thing you actually want out of them. You know.
Well, I think that I mean, looking back at the early battle reports, I mean they're very crisp. And very neatly laid out and dense as well when you compare them to modern battle reports. They are text heavy. So generating one of these things was a chunk of work. It really was, because you'd be rewriting thousands and thousands of words each, basically, to go along with
editing it all together. Making sense of it.
You were writing them as a narrative more so than you would say, the elves,
Yeah, it was semi-color text.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember this, but I ended up doing most of the turn by turns.
Right,
rather than directly referencing dice rolls.
Yeah, well, that just seemed boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Overall, I mean, nobody wants to read like I rolled a 5 and a 6 and a 3 and a 2 and a 1. They want to say, yes, the dwarves were stood up to the elves' sweeping advance or what have you. It's far more dynamic to talk about it that way. Although we did get in trouble for using the word beaten off too much time. It means something very different to Americans, as it turns out. But, it was the 90s. We were ignorant of such things.
But I mean, they were good fun. It started out with being Space Marine stuff, almost exclusively to start off with, because that's what we were working on. Basically.
The big game at the time, really, wasn't it?
Well, 40K was still the big, but it's what we were working on, and I don't think anybody else was completely convinced, apart from maybe Robin, that battle reports would be a cool thing.
Yes.
I mean, it's difficult to understand that now, but I mean, White Dwarf had been going for over 100 issues, almost 150 issues, about having battle reports in it. So it was like, well, why do you think this is a good idea? And so
nobody plays games anyway, right, Joe?
That's right. So we said, well, let us do one. So we did one, and of course it was just instantly.
It was massively popular. They're like, when are you going to do the next one? It's like, we want one every month. I'm like, what?
Yeah, well, we got there in the end. I mean, it took a little while to get to be able to do one a month. I think it started off a bit slower than that, basically, because it really was just you and me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a job of work. It was interesting. I was talking to AD Wood on Facebook, because he got landed with the "you are responsible for battle reports" for a while, and he was saying how much work it is, actual work, just putting one together. I used to figure on it taking, out of every month, a week would be spent on battle report.
Yeah.
Probably 25%
for me too, basically. So for two people, that's almost a full-time job, if you know what I mean. Certainly, it's a half.
We were doing this on the side as well as developing games and other White Dwarf skills at the same time.
Bear in mind that it's not just playing the game; you're also effectively kind of selling it as a product in some ways, I suppose.
Well, we've talked about this before about why did it hit so hard for people because they were genuinely loved. People were really excited. When we saw people in games days and stuff like that, they'd very often talk to us about battle reports that they'd seen us play, and it's part of it. It's taken for granted now that people are personalities, they have a brand and all this sort of stuff. And neither of us realised it at the time, but we were becoming personality. We were getting inside their monkey sphere of people that they knew that play games like them, went through the same trials and tribulations of like success and failure and all the rest of it.
Sure.
Came up both plans that didn't work, had bad dice rolls, and it made it very, very real, I think, rather than just like a name that's he's written something. And you've probably gone through this already by reading all the Charles Grant books. I haven't.
Yeah.
Where you thought of him as being a person who played games rather than just this distant voice that said.
Say, like as a young kid reading White Dwarf Battle Reports, I kind of you get drawn in, and it's almost like a sense of community.
Yes.
Like you get to hang out with Andy Chambers, like playing Battle Reports.
And they're having a game for your entertainment. Isn't this cool?
Yeah.
And I think it really hit hard for that. And plus, it showed how we played games, which was actually a really useful thing, because you write a set of rules and you say these things work away. Actually seeing a practical example of this, of people playing a game. Okay, you've read all the rules, but it's all like,
the reality is.
How does this come together? And it's like, this is how it all comes together. I see. And they put about that much terrain on the table. These are the kinds of forces they use. Ooh, that's useful to know.
And you've already mentioned then why you picked the forces you did, kind of thing. So
and for us it was a chance to sort of expound on why different things were good for different things and how you'd use them. So there was tactics in it as well.
So I think, to start off with, that was the primary focus, and it wasn't so. I guess there was an element of promotional kind of like stuff in there, but it came. I think it was as much about showing the game and talking about it, because when you've designed a game, you're quite interested in basically explaining to people in kind of like you want to show it off, and bring out some of its nuances, basically. And so we'd do that. But then for me, and I think for Andy too, as we went along, I started to think of the battle reports as an article in disguise, is the way that I ended up thinking about them. So I'd write the intro, and if I was doing the turn by turn bits and the outro, I'd have some kind of a point that I was trying to make that I'd tease out through those three things, so that you got it kind of like it had a point, rather than just here's a battle that we fought, here's the armies that we picked, and the tactics that we used. So there were various different subjects.
Today we're going to study the subject of how to use Wind Rider hosts or what have you.
It could be like that, but it could also be things like, to address the elephant in the room, I usually lost the battle reports that I played against Andy. It was and to the extent that it became a real thing. People would come. Well, there wasn't really so much of a rivalry as people kind of like coming up and say, I checked to see which side you were playing, because I knew that they'd lose the battle report and stuff like that. It was just like...
It was when the guy showed up with T-shirts saying Jervis couldn't beat me either. That's when I realised it got really bad.
No, I had a photograph of that chap for ages and ages on my desk. I'd got a Polaroid of him, funnily enough, for the thing.
God.
But and so there was one that I did, which was about losing. About how you cope with losing, because I could remember that the game that I'd played, I really thought I was going to win, and then I lost anyway, and I was a complete git. Basically, I was grumpy. I was I was ready to take my dice home, roll my mat home, something like that. It was just and I thought about it afterwards, and I thought, well, that was really not the way I should have behaved. That was wrong. So the intro and the outro, I remember my original title for it was Zen and the Art of Wargaming, but it was about how to deal with the emotions that you feel, and I think that writing those then set me up for doing things like Standard Bearer and the J-Files and stuff, because it was a natural continuation about saying, well, there are some things that I want to write about that don't really fit into a battle report at all, however much I disguise them.
More to the game than playing the game itself. There are the feelings, the emotions, the finances, everything goes into it. Sure.
And so when I started writing those things, basically what I pretended to be was Charles Grant out of it. He's got a particular kind of, he's a bit like an old-fashioned uncle, basically, kind of like in his tone. But then slowly over time I developed my own writing style. So it was doing battle reports, and then the follow-on from those, the J-Files articles and stuff like that, that taught me how to write about not war games rules. Articles.
Write with a personality and say, this is me, hello, I'm here, Jervis, talking to you right now, not here are the rules. Because it is different and it requires a different voice. I kind of had that all along, because I just...
I think, like you
just wrote colour text. I never really thought about it very deeply or anything like that. Just like, well, here's what I'm doing.
I mean, you started off by submitting rules for Epic, really, didn't you?
That's right.
Almost as like a fan kind of coming into it.
Absolutely, as a fan coming into it, because Jervis hadn't done his job and written one-man Titan rules, and I was like, "Where's my one-man Titan? I'll write them myself." And I honestly wish I had been more philosophical about it, because things like learning how to lose with grace. It took me several more decades to get. I'm not sure I'm quite there even yet.
Well, playing the games against me, you didn't really have to learn how to lose with grace terribly much.
No, well, it was partly driven by that unshakable urge I must win. But as I've explained to people, and I'm going to say it again here now, it was really unfair on you for the public to see you that way, because we used to play games all the time, almost daily, certainly weekly, and you would win against me more often than you lost.
Yeah,
was the truth, because you came with a plan. And I did not, as a rule of thumb. But when it came to battle reports, because they were so disruptive, you'd be stopping, taking notes, people would be coming along, throwing their peanuts into oh, you shouldn't do that, oh, you don't want to be rolling that dice. All through a very long day.
Well, at least a day.
At least a day.
At least a day. Sometimes
generally, we tried to crank them out over the course of one day.
Yeah, to actually play the game.
It became nightmarish if you had to leave it overnight.
Yeah.
But because of that, it was very disruptive, and Jervis's plan would get forgotten somewhere along the line. I always just thrived on chaos anyway.
Sure.
So at moment to moment, I'd just do what seemed like the best idea at the time and be luckier. And so it worked out that Jervis is just not good in that environment.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. My attention to detail tended to wander, basically.
Yeah, but that was your strength in normal games, and I know this because they played you plenty when we weren't doing battle reports, and that strength would screw me every time. But not in that environment.
Something I said I was filming with Robin Dews the other day, and something he touched upon, I can't remember who it was that made the comment, was about playing, if like let's say you two are playing a game and by turn 2 it's obvious that Andy's going to win, would you ever, not to say that the game is being fixed, but would you ever kind of play the game again to try and get a bit of a closer outcome? So
not initially, no, we didn't do that at the start. We didn't need to either, because we were really well-matched opponents and we'd played each other a lot.
Yeah, sure.
So they were always fairly tight games, but as time went by, that certainly became the case. Once it became such a selling tool, of you can't have the new guys lose, became really a diktat that was handed down to us. So in that case, it's like, well, clearly the new guys are going to be losing this. We need to just reset and play again, and that would happen later on.
It could do. It was a rarity though, even then, I think, because it just like
Jervis, no, it was quite common at a certain point in time. You weren't doing battle reports at that point.
Okay.
Okay, well, when you were off doing Fanatic and things like that, and we were still in the main studio doing battle report. A lot of the 40k 3rd edition ones went that way of like, oh, new guys can't lose, better do it again.
Right, okay,
and Warhammer as well at that time, which I always felt kind of debased the whole process, because just because the new guys lose in a game doesn't mean that they're suddenly unsellable.
Yeah, it's just,
you can point out where they went wrong, what their strengths are, how people could do better, and all that sort of stuff. I don't think it was as negative, but of course, from the sales perspective, it's just like that.
I think that people could overreact. I think that.
Why would someone buy a product that's?
That's clearly inferior because it lost in the battle report, because they got so used to selling things off the back of battle reports at the time.
I can remember being told off for letting a named a special character get killed. It was like, well, he's dead now, so people can't use him.
Though? It was Marnie's Kelgar.
I thought it was Azag the Slaughterer or something like that. But I can remember that it was like, oh, this is, now people think they can't use them in their army because they're dead. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure that's really going on? And it probably happened in a store once, but as soon as it happened somewhere once, then
it made it way up to the area
way,
manager, up to HQ, over to the studio.
Fact that a White Dwarf saying this character has been killed off.
Yeah, you're destroying our sales.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I'd say I can remember there were once when you got a very lopsided result, and you just say, well, we're going to have to start again. But the problem was that you'd committed so much time to get into to the end of turn 2.
Plus,
the thought of starting a game was a real pain in the
Another
arse,
thing I learned, actually, because we, especially early on, we had some horrendously offhand results, but I learned the power of propaganda when I was writing up the turn by turn. And what you were saying about, always written up very narratively, you can make the narrative sound really good for somebody who's actually losing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Heroic last stands and fighting to the last man and desperate.
If you're looking at pinpoint little bits rather than the bigger picture.
Yeah. You can absolutely make things sound a lot closer than they actually are, being the point. Despite what's happening on the tabletop, despite what the die rolls are. So there was a certain skill to, not even if it was kind of lopsided, it didn't sound that way up until the last moment. And besides which, as we found in games, we try to design games where you can come back.
Sure.
And just because you had a bad first or second turn doesn't mean that you can't come back and win in the end.
Not too bad that you're going to lose. I mean, I think the other thing that I remember fondly about reports is that you could do experimental things with them too.
So much better on that than I was.
Well, I used to enjoy. Nigel Stillman, of course, as well. Would write amazing scenarios for battle reports. But I think there were a couple that stand out for me, and I think the main one is Gathering of Might, which is where we did a really big Warhammer. It was every single model that we had available in 2 armies, basically. That was the idea, with 6 people
Inspired
playing.
by Charles Grant,
Yeah,
clearly.
absolutely. Yeah, well, actually, yes, it was very close to
bravely.
the big battles in here. Yeah, you could only communicate with messages, as I remember, was one of the rules. You had to write to, and that was great, and that was a big hit too. So it kind of, because it was mighty. But I guess the other thing about battle reports worth bearing in mind is that when we were doing them, first of all, the armies that we used for playtesting, battle reports, and the photography on the front of the boxes were all the same heavy metal armies. So we were using armies painted by the heavy metal miniature painters, arguably the best stuff in the world, that was initially for the box covers, and then we'd end up with it in the games collection.
It would be a squad of something, because that was what's in the box.
It would
be
drive our army collecting to
absolutely.
the army that we
when you want
fielded.
to pick your army, you can have 1 assault squad. That's what's been painted. They're armed this way. No, you don't get any choices. We have precisely 1 devastator squad. They are armed with these heavy weapons. You don't get any choices.
Absolutely.
And so on and so forth. So vehicles was even better. Like, we have 1 rhino.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So we had to play with those things, but then we were playing the games with those actual models. So you got weirdly, it would mean that if you got your box, you could see the actual squad from the cover of your box on the tabletop.
And they were gorgeous. It must be
they
said.
were. Oh no, that was lovely. And the scenery the same. The scenery that we were using was the scenery that was used for photography and stuff like that. And then with Gathering of Might, my idea was that we've got all of these shells with all of these armies. What if we just use all of them?
Sure.
Let's have a game where we use every single one of them, and that was the way that we picked the armies.
I remember reading that as a kid, and that particular battle, it really drew you in because of that in your head is what Warhammer is. It's just massive.
Aspirational.
It was really aspirational. It was. That's true.
The sort of thing that you can't do it yourself, but you can aspire to doing it one day, and that's cool. And I think that was one of the things that being too retail-y about battle reports missed the aspirational aspect of it.
I think that's definitely true, because that was done at when the studio was a proper ivory tower, completely isolated from all of the rest of the business. And then the other thing that I remember fondly was when you and I basically we'd stopped doing so many battle reports, and like Gav, Jake Thornton, and some of the other people from the White Dwarf crew were doing quite
Warwick
a lot of them. Warwick and And there was one little set of Warhammer battle reports that ended up becoming a campaign, like a narrative campaign, where they played one game and then we came up with a story that would link it to the next battle report that they played, and that created the scenario for the next one, and then the next one after that, and things like that. And I remember it was very hobbyish. Basically, it was almost like a club, but the club would then have the battles that it played. Printed up in White Dwarf magazine, basically. It was
made people very happy. We were in a great spot at the studio at that time. The other one I always remember is the one where we took all of the tanks.
Yes.
And did the 40k battle report with all of the tanks.
All of the tanks.
Yes. What's the objective of this battle report? To use all of the tanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is second edition 40k, bear in mind.
God,
so
it was those weird to hit tables things with the transparent stuff.
Yes.
which is another classic, basically.
Yeah, so it kind of wound up
great
as being
game.
Space Marines versus Imperial Guard by definition, because that was who had the
those were
most
tanks
tanks.
that we had.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, when it came to, I suppose, part of a bigger question then, like, did you guys say, this month we're going to do a battle report, are we just doing two armies smacking into each other, or do we want to, did you get to decide the kind of scenarios you played, or was there a kind of directive from...
No, we would decide how to handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, what was being used, I say that got tighter over time.
Yeah, well, I think that even from fairly early on, if there was a new army book or codex coming out,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
it was the obvious thing to do was use that new army,
that makes sense.
and because we'd be writing a lot of the material to go into White Dwarf magazine in support of the new game system coming out.
Yes.
So doing a battle report at the same time made
Just
a lot
made
of sense.
sense,
We'd been play
basically.
testing it and things. So that happened from early on, but then. At that time, you didn't get army books every month. I mean, nowadays you get at least one army book or codex, and generally more coming out every month. So back then there'd be 3 months between them, I would guess, roughly. It got closer and closer.
Yeah,
But you'd have your months where we can't do a new army book because there isn't one.
Yes.
So we'll do a little linked up game, or the largest tank battle that we can think of.
Yeah,
whatever it might be,
or
really.
Bloodbath at Orc's Drift, or whatever it
Yes,
was he did. as well.
Bloodbath at Orc's Drift. That was
Yeah,
it,
a themed one every now and again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was nice to do themed ones like club events, in effect.
Yeah.
But it was also nice to do what I was talking about, just like playing the basic game as presented.
Sure.
As well, I had a lot of empathy for that, and using the scenarios that were in the book rather than making things up. So there was kind of room for both. I say that kind of shut down later on.
Yeah, it got rarer. I think battle reports became almost institutionalized within the magazine. There was one
almost
every.
about it. They were.
Yeah, no, well, they still are. It's
absolutely.
It's a thing. And you'd get lots of different people writing it, and basically it became part of the job of the White Dwarf team to do that. So you generally didn't have the games designers anymore doing battle reports unless it was a special occasion. So I can remember doing one for like 7th or 8th edition Warhammer coming out and stuff like that, kind of like going out, like something. That was Matt Ward's edition of the game, but I can remember playing against him and stuff like that, and it'd been a while since I'd done a battle report, really. So there was that period of time when we were just writing all of them, and then being involved in quite a lot of them in helping come to the stories, and then slowly that became less and less the case.
Happily shed that responsibility onto someone else. So at the point where, because I think it was Paul Sawyer basically said, no, we should be doing the battle reports with the White Dwarf crew, and I was like, have at it, man.
Absolutely.
Been doing them for years, monthly, for years at that point. So,
and I think that started to change a lot of the way. I mean, it's interesting about the narrative stuff, because I think that's when you started to get some battle reports which were purely narrative. They weren't presented as it being a game as such, so much as a story and things, and stuff being done differently to the way that we'd have gone about it.
Yes.
I think the other thing that's interesting is, battle reports for the longest time only ever appeared in White Dwarf magazine, and they didn't appear anywhere else. I mean, they don't appear in historical war games magazines, but for the simple reason they take such a long time to do. They're such hard work, and really only Workshop was in a position to do that. But more over the last sort of like decade or so, what you've got are online video battle reports. Battle reports done as a film of 2 people playing a game are a real thing now. And it's quite a different format, different set of skills, obviously because you've got the people there presenting and being able to talk to camera. But I think it's interesting, because they've got those trace their lineage back to the White Dwarf battle reports, and they're
when I do a game these days, people ask if there's video battle reports they can go and look out for it, or how to play online that's a video. So
absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Video killed the magazine star.
Well, I think that it was. They still do battle reports in White Dwarf magazine, so it's they're still there. Nobody else has done them, so it's really. I think what you've got is that you've got a lot more people doing battle reports now. They just don't do them in the same way. That we used to do them in as a written
spawned,
medium.
A kind of particular media in relation to gaming is what it comes down to, the battle report. And yes, it had existed before, But because it was in White Dwarf as such a regular feature for so long, I think it's definitely wormed its way into a lot
It's
of
become
brains.
part of the zeitgeist, basically, hasn't it? Where you just,
and as we
yeah,
say,
people expect to see
there's a
them.
lot of positives to showing a game being played.
Sure.
Genuinely is. I mean, for one, you can show it's fun, which it should be. But you can just demonstrate a lot about how you imagine people will be playing the game. Because at the end of the day, you write a set of rules. People don't know if you don't tell them, right? Your rules may or may not tell them essential things about, what you take for granted about. Terrain density is a classic one. Because you can't really write rules for how dense somebody's terrain is, because you don't know how much terrain they've got unless you physically gave it to them in the box. You can't guarantee they've got anything. So that's always a tricky subject when you're writing a set of rules. But by doing a battle report, you can basically show this is kind of how we set a table up, and I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, sure. Is there anything to be said on, you touched upon it when we were doing Battlefleet Gothic earlier, when Games Workshop kind of got to that point where they said, we're now only going to do Warhammer Fantasy and Lord of the Rings. Kind of up to, before then, you'd have battle reports with Epic, Battlefleet Gothic, Mordheim, and all that kind of got taken away from White Dwarf.
That was one of the things that made battle reports turn into distinctly being a grind, because they did turn into a grind. There's no two ways about it. The expectation that there'd always be one produced, and the fact it was in a limited number of game systems, the fact that it had to revolve around new releases, the new releases had to win. By the late 90s, it was just not what it had been, really. It was no longer that kind of club experience thing.
Because all of those games I've just mentioned then obviously kind of moved over to Fnatic. And like the magazine, Fnatic magazine didn't really
we didn't have the resources to do battle reports. No, definitely not. No, it's interesting what you're saying, because I was just thinking back to some of the last battle reports that I did, but I think that I remember them quite fondly, the later ones, because I was.
You might have got out of that hole in the end.
No, I think I did, because I dodged it going down to Fnatic, and then I came. But then when I came back, I was just coming in. So the launch of Warhammer. It was just two armies fighting, basically. So it was like, it was classic kind of introducing the new game system. Here's what's different about 8th. And then I think the other one was Island of Blood, I want to call it, which was a huge one, but that was a bit like Gathering of Might. It was a gigantic, and all the scenery being made for it. It was an amazing set of scenery, and then a special scenario, really big army. So it was very old school kind of like battle report.
I'm glad they clawed it back, because it just turned into a meat market grind for a while.
I think those things can happen. One thing that you're just doing repetitively, I have a tendency to kind of like, unless you're very careful, kind of like go down to the simplest, most straightforward way of doing it.
This is it. I was communicating with Adi, and he was talking about it. He said that it was such a large part of his job, and basically they sat down and they had a White Dwarf meeting with Paul Sawyer one day, and he was like, and Paul Sawyer set out like, so I want to do these battle reports and more. It was when they went to Fat Dwarf, that was it, and 25% extra pages. And he said his stomach just dropped in that moment, in that meeting, and that was the point where he said, I don't want to work on White Dwarf anymore.
Right.
Because it was just too much.
Hard. Too much stuff.
And Paul Sawyer then kind of, he did go ahead with it really, didn't he? And I think White Dwarf at that time, when he took over, I think they were pumping it out. I think from a production level, they were,
well, they had Paul built up the White Dwarf crew a lot. I think they outnumbered the games developers at one point.
Absolutely.
And then we managed to recruit a few more games developers and just about stay on top of it. So, but it was a much larger crew, and that's I say they took them internally and churned them out there. Except for the occasions when there was something new to trot out.
Well, we had our last battle report as well, where which was about 4 years ago now, I guess, something like that.
Must be, maybe even longer. So it was in the before times, before the pandemic.
It would be, so.
We played Kill Team, didn't we?
We got basically, I can't know whose idea it was, but they said, it would be good to get you and Andy back together again. I said, well, I'm in touch with Andy. I'll ask him if he'll do it. And so we got to do a battle report again, and it was crazy really, because I think we were both quite nervous when we went into it, because it had been a long time since we'd done a battle report. I mean, you know, longer for Andy than for me, but still, it was quite a while since I'd done one. But we sat down and we started playing, and it was like in about 5 minutes, it was just back. Yeah, we were just doing what we did basically. And I can remember whoever it was who was writing up the battle report was saying that's just. They really enjoyed it, because it was because I think that the banter and the kind of like the
that's right, 'cause it was Orcs and Imperial Guard.
We played 3 games. We played 3 games, and I think you won 2 of them and I won 1. so some things never change.
I was playing your game, Jervis, so you're bound to lose.
That's true.
You may have been told this before, but designers always lose at their own games.
Yeah, that's true.
At least 2/3 of the time, anyway. So, but no, that was a real hoot. I was really happy to do it. It was horrible going back into workshop, I must say. It was such a sterile environment. Plus, I kind of felt like they were messing with me. If you remember, they had like big flashlight for taking photographs.
Okay, right. During the game, yes.
During the game,
yeah.
So you get to the end of your turn, and then it'd be like flash bulbs going off.
Yeah.
So bright that they'd go through your eyelids.
See your retinas.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it didn't take many turns of that before I'd had enough, frankly. It was like, oh, guys, really? Really? You really need the lights for this?
Yeah. Battle reports have to be a bit of hard work.
Yeah, this is it. Reintroduce the pain. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but no, it was fun to do anyway, and it was kind of like it brought things full circle really, because after, a couple of years after that, then I retired basically. So it's
Yes, good times. Genuinely one of my fondest memories from Games Workshop is doing battle reports with you.
Yeah, it was, especially the early ones. It was great fun, wasn't it? It really was, because it was. I can remember that room. This one, there's that battle report back here. But yeah, okay. See it on. So can you see that on your camera? Okay, you go. Yeah, but the sand on that table always brings, because basically when we were doing battle, what we'd do is we had a box of sand. And what we found was that, particularly with Space Marine games, but to be honest, with any of the games, if you created roads, it made the terrain look cohesive. It made it seem like a real place. Yeah. Whereas if you just plonked the scenery down, so you just had buildings and trees in the middle of a green field, it just kind of didn't look like a real place at all. So we'd sit there and we'd kind of like sprinkle the sand down to create the roads. But Rick and Alan Merritt really didn't like us doing it, because it wasn't, I don't know why, they had something against it. And they one day we came in and they'd stolen our box of sand and said that you can't do that anymore. So the sand disappears after a few of the battle reports, basically. Yeah. But when we were doing this one, we were just down in our little room. Nobody would
doing
bother
our
us.
thing. Yeah. I think they were worried that it would damage the tables, because bear in mind these are like
That's
flock
true.
and
Yeah,
sand.
that was because we also had our dustpan and brush.
We cleaned up after ourselves.
Yeah, we did.
And the irony is, these flock and sand tables, they'd shed flock all the time anyway. Like, if you rested your elbow on one, it'd just come away covered in flock.
What battle report is that one?
This is the what is in many ways the classic one to, I think, both you and me. It's the Ally Tuck and Blood Angel Space Marine.
That's right. I think that's so that's sort of like we were trying to remember, because I thought it was the first one, but it's not. No. So there's at least one before that, possibly 2.
I think there's at least 2 before this one.
Yeah.
But this is the one where we'd kind of like we'd got our format down and we were clicking on it, and this one really came together, and it was a really nice tight game as well. Yeah. And it was just great in general.
Yeah, the maps all work and stuff.
It's Wind Rider hosts, I remember. I've got the scars, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
This is 30 years on, guys, more.
So it went kind of backwards and forwards a bit, didn't it? I remember.
It did.
Was I chasing? I can't remember exactly what was happening.
I don't know. This is one of the things that Epi was good for, is that you had to turn by turn.
You had your victory points at the end of each turn.
I found that helpful.
Yeah. But this has still got the tactical notes in, so it's got the description of what happened.
Yeah, it is very, very early, you're right, but it's literally not the first one to do, because I think you'd lost the couple preceding this one as well. And in this one, I was like, maybe I wouldn't go quite so all out, sort of thing, and let you breathe. The thing. He might even have mentioned to me that it was becoming a problem, but
I don't think I did.
you did at one point. Yeah. You did at one point. Well, in a very Jervis way, you came to me and said, like, I'm getting a reputation for losing games all the time, but I'm all right with it. And it was news to me at all, that this was going on. So I thought it was very unjust. Yeah,
you get the new rules. It's just a cool thing, actually. I like best-ofs.
Well, we did one for Bloodred Skies, like a compendium type thing of submissions. Well, I kept seeing stuff on the internet that was really good, like full articles or scenarios or set campaign rules.
Yeah.
And it's like, because of the way of the internet, it goes in a file somewhere, and then people forget it's there, and nobody knows to ask for it in the first place. So they just vanish.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, can't we just pull all these things together and do a compendium? And we did. It's really cool.
Yeah. No, when I was looking around trying to, because I'd looked around to see if I'd got any old White Dwarfs, and I do. They're just pre-100, the ones that I've got in my collection at home. But I found the best of White Dwarf scenarios, which is old D&D scenarios.
Oh, wow.
Things like that, which was, I remember this.
Well, that is really going back.
It was.
Not quite
stuff.
L and Weasel levels, but almost. I remember taking this photo as well. This is the Titan having a reactor meltdown.
That's right, with all our
action
wool
shot
and stuff.
Every bit of cotton wool I could have found that had been sprayed colours stuffed underneath it.
Good stuff.
So they're very, very happy memories, these are.